Mortgage Talk with Mark, where we are not going to be talking about mortgages today. We're going to talk about something very more interesting than that for sure. I met my next guest about a month ago. One of the things I do on the outside of my business is a volunteer with the Westlake Chamber as an ambassador. And one of my jobs, if you will, is to introduce or to not introduce so much, but to support new businesses in the Westlake area. And I was assigned a group called Neuro Limits, and I met them about a month ago. And I met a man here named Dr. Tony Pissarro and his partner, Dr. Jorge Chavez. And I was fascinated by what they were doing, what they're up to. Then about a week ago, we had a ribbon cutting to introduce them to the community. And I said, Tony, you would be perfect for my little podcast because I think the world needs to know more about what you're up to. So I want to introduce my new friend, Tony Pissarro, Dr. Tony Pissarro, who's a neuroscientist. And introduce yourself real quick and say hi.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'm Tony Pissarro. I'm a PhD neuroscientist. Just moved to the Austin area last August. And
welcome.
Thank you.
From the great city of Houston, Texas, my hometown.
Yeah. Trying to keep it within state. We just opened up our clinic a few months ago and had the grand opening. Thank you so much for speaking at that last week.
You're very welcome.
By the way, it was a huge success, and we're very excited about the potential.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So let's kind of start at the beginning, if we could. Let's back up a little bit to when you were younger and tell us more about what fascinated you about the brain that would make you kind of go into neuroscience. I've never met a neuroscientist before. I know some neurologists, but that's a little bit different science, I guess, or different studies. So kind of tell us about where it started and your motivation or your passion.
That's a good question. Yeah. Truth be told, up until college and undergrad, I hadn't met a neuroscientist or a neurologist or a neurosurgeon myself. And it wasn't even, if I'm being honest, on my radar.
Were you studying biology? What were you?
I was studying computer science.
Okay.
I was destined to be one of those programmers and, that just sits in a basement, programs all the time. And a few years into it, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Before AI
20 years.
And so forth.
Right.
Yeah. And so that wasn't on the radar either. And so I took some electives in psychology and started learning about behavior, and that fascinated me so much so that I pivoted. I changed majors midway through to cognitive science with a focus on psychology. And then my senior year started working in a MEG lab, magnetoencephalography. It's similar to EEG, except it measures magnetic fields of the brain.
Okay.
At UT Houston, in the health science center there, and started working in the hospital.
Okay.
In Memorial Hermann Hospital over there, which is coincidentally the same hospital I was born in.
Oh.
I think we talked about that before.
I was born in Hermann.
Yeah. And
way before you.
Yeah. And so I worked in that lab at the end of my undergrad and for a year after, and I knew I wanted to go into grad school and focus on neuroscience. And that was sort of, in my mind, the fusion of the behavior, the psychology, the cognitive science, and the more technical, the computer programming and some of the statistics. And it combined all of those things that I love. And initially I was working in the medical clinic, working with tumor, stroke, epilepsy patients, doing what's called motor mapping.
Okay.
Where we have folks do tasks using the MEG, monitor them with EEG, and then we map exactly where their motor mapping is for key functions, things you need to do every day, like moving your hand, legs.
Were your patients mainly people who had strokes or accidents or something?
There are people that needed surgery.
Surgeries.
And so we remove a tumor or epilepsy to correct it or put it in a shunt or something like that. And so as a result, it was up to us to map the motor and the language and even the memory of these folks, because we want to preserve that above all else.
Oh, sure.
Other parts of the brain, take some of it out, mess with it. It could have some effect. But for sure, these parts we want to preserve. And I distinctly remember being in the OR and seeing someone with a craniotomy and their brain's exposed, and they do what's called the WADA test. It's this gold standard test for exactly figuring out where language is, where they basically have the brain exposed and they wake the person up. They don't see anything. They're disoriented.
Sure.
And they ask them questions, and they kind of
do
a little stimulation on the brain and see if that changes the language.
Fascinating.
And then they put them back to sleep and they operate. And I was hooked. I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, this is great. This is so rewarding for me to see that all of the effort we put into this is actually how it manifests to help someone so that we preserve important things. And so just that kind of continued and working in that lab and in grad school and just learning more about the brain, about behavior, but also about neuroimaging and kind of how it all comes together to help specific clinical populations. And as I discussed it more with friends and family, especially afterwards, looking back, I tried to articulate what it was that really drew me to that. And it was, it was really about exploring the unknown. It was about creating a hypothesis, an experiment, something that you thought might be true, and then spending all the time collecting all the data, analyzing everything, and then at the end, seeing what result you get, and maybe it's a new thing that no one's ever discovered. And that was fascinating. And for some reason,
it's fascinating. Just listen to it.
I always compared it to when I was a kid. I loved fishing, but I didn't like the act of fishing. What I loved was pulling something out of the water, and you don't know what you're going to get. Right. Could be a little nothing. Could be the biggest fish in the world. You don't know.
That's funny. That's a good way of looking at it.
It was sort of it's my curiosity, I think, that drove me.
Yeah. So somebody like myself who doesn't know any other neuroscientists, give us a day in the life of what you do kind of day to day at your clinic, because I think it's a fascinating combination of what you and Jorge bring in the marketplace personally, between the psychology and the science behind it.
Yeah. So there's a number of things. I'll back up a second and say there's a number of things that neuroscientists do. So there's lots of types of neuroscientists.
Okay. I didn't know that.
I am what's considered a cognitive neuroscientist with a focus on neuroimaging. There are molecular neuroscientists. These are folks that study at the molecular level how the brain, usually in rodent models or in animal models, how the brain interacts at a single neuron level and how different chemicals interact with that. That usually leads to kind of pharmacology and other agents like that. There's systems neuroscience, which is sort of a similar thing, but we're looking at like how different molecular systems interact with one another. And then there's computational neuroscientists. They're the ones that just kind of study the computation around neuronal firing and how things work. So lots of different areas. I chose my lane early on and said, this is what I wanted to do. And so what I do typically day to day at the clinic is we're constantly building upon and revising our technologies, some of the ones that we've worked on, whether it's EEG diagnostics or neurofeedback protocols, and not just covering theoretical, what we should be doing, but how is this manifest in our actual technology that we use when we collect data from someone? Is it right? Is it wrong? Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to modify? A lot of times it involves AI and machine learning these days to kind of better
interpret or predict
both things, both the interpretation, especially these days of Gen AI and the prediction models of, what is someone's brain telling us about exactly their networks and the things that are going on there. And then a lot of it's educating folks, doing like what we're doing here, educating folks on trying to convey something complex. And it is,
it's complicated, complex, as they say.
Right. Yeah. Use the words you used the other week. Exactly. And try and convey it in a way that not only makes sense, but is actionable, right? I don't want to create a seminar where I'm teaching folks. It's great that they learn, but what I really want to hopefully instill is confidence that this technology or this therapy can help them and they understand why.
Right.
And then hopefully they start to see the effects of that.
Yeah. And you showed some of that at the open house or the ribbon cutting the other night. You went into a little bit more detail. It's just fascinating,
Yeah.
So
it's I'm a little biased.
Well, absolutely.
Super, super fascinating. And it's
we should be very proud too. For sure. So let's kind of talk about the brain a little bit in plain English, if we could, because I take, like most people, I probably take my brain for granted. I think about when I have a headache. That's about it, But it's a complex, what do you call it? Not a muscle. What is it?
It's just an organ.
An organ.
Any other organ.
The
most complex one. It's sort of the last unknown piece of the human body.
Then there's a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere and all that sort of thing.
You have pretty much two halves of your brain that, at least on the surface, look identical, and for the most part, they are. And there's a few misconceptions out there that I've gotten used to helping folks correct their understanding of it. I think the one that I hear all the time is, does this help me utilize more of my brain? I always hear you only use 10% of your brain. I want to use 100% of my brain.
What does that mean, 10%? What does that mean?
Well, so at any given time, if you're using neuroimaging, something especially that has really high temporal precision like EEG or MEG, you can see that of all of the neurons in your brain, maybe on average, you can say something like 10% are active at any given time.
Okay.
What you don't want You don't want 100% of your neurons firing at the same time, because when that happens, you have probably what's called a grand mal seizure, and then your brain
That's not good.
afterwards
It's almost exploding
tries
or something.
to recover. Yeah, and so it's not like there's parts of your brain you just never use.
Sure.
It's at any given time, there are different networks of brain regions communicating depending on what you're doing. If I'm lifting my arm up, if I'm talking, if I'm just sitting there thinking about my day, if I'm speaking to someone, all of those actions have a different set of brain regions that are active, and it happens super fast. It happens, this is on the order of milliseconds. We're talking sometimes, a few hundred milliseconds. And so you don't want to use more than 10% of your brain necessarily at a time. What you want to do is make sure that your brain is firing more efficiently and that those networks are stronger, the ones that can help you for certain abilities, and the ones that, if you're an athlete, for example, you want to improve those hand-eye coordination, those motor circuits. We want to strengthen those pathways that connect those brain regions. We don't necessarily want you to use more of your brain, because different parts of the brain correspond to different behaviors.
Strengthen the ones you are using.
Right. So I think that's the biggest misconception that I try and help folks kind of correct on. And it, another important thing to consider is your brain uses so much energy. It uses like 20% of your available energy. And so if you have a seizure, that the reason why folks afterwards need some time to recoup is because you've just exhausted so much energy. You had all those neurons firing at once. You need time to recover, and that's where
I guess that's why we sleep
go.
too. That's why sleep is important.
Sleep is very important. We've learned a lot about sleep the last few decades, even the last few years. We understand that that's integral to kind of cleaning out the excess, the waste in our brain, especially during deep sleep, is where we kind of, it's sort of like going through a cleaning process. So it's not just important for us to have our dreams and to just take some time to rest our bodies, but from the brain's perspective, it's fundamental in kind of eliminating that waste and sort of cleansing the brain of.
And they talk about healthy sleep is 7 to 8 hours a day. Would you say is there any science around that?
When you start to look at averages and you oversimplify things and just look at one metric like average number of sleep, it becomes very difficult to summarize for all adults. And that's why a lot of these studies say, well, less than 7 hours bad, more than 8 hours bad. And then you start to get more and more narrow to, what are we getting at 7.23 hours? I mean, the end of the day, it comes down to the architecture of your sleep. How much deep sleep do you have? How much REM do you have? How much do you get away from waking up in the middle of the night? As you get older, the frequency of that increases.
It does,
especially with old age. And stay awake
I can
for
tell
longer.
You that,
yeah, and,
right here.
And it's not, it's not just having to go to the bathroom or things like that. It's just how the brain operates. And so it's not just amount of sleep. Important. You can't get by with most people 3 or 4 hours of sleep. You have to have sufficient sleep, but it's also the quality of sleep. And being able to improve that so that you're getting restful sleep. And you're accounting for things like sleep apnea, insomnia, and things like that.
Yeah. And let's kind of back up a little bit about the origin of neuro limits in the sense of your partner, Dr. Jorge Chavez, is a PhD in psychology. And you have a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. And so you guys came together with this really interesting platform, in my opinion, on how to work with mental health struggles psychologically and biologically, if you will. Kind of explain how that works a little bit.
That's a good question. So we came together with different backgrounds, but with
and he's a buddy from high school.
Buddy from high school. That's right. Went to high school.
Fun story. Back
in Houston many years ago, and we've talked about doing something like this for a while, especially as we've experienced some of these mental health and neurological disorders firsthand, not for ourselves necessarily, but for our families. And that always increases the interest when it becomes personal. And so we set out to kind of look in the space and see, is there room for us? Is there room for? We knew there was room for him as a licensed clinical psychologist, but was there room for me as a neuroscientist, not a physician by any means? And once we kind of assessed the landscape, not just here locally in Austin, but more broadly across the country, we realized there was so much room for improvement. There was, folks were doing things like TMS, which we'll talk about in a bit, and their feedback and things like that. But most of the clinics didn't have any sort of neuroscience understanding. They didn't have any neurologists on staff or neurosurgeons or neuroscientists. They had psychiatrists and psychologists or maybe just primary care physicians who understood at a high level, how does this work? How can this help patients with mental health issues? But not how necessarily the brain operates at a very intricate level. And how does this technology stimulate the brain or help the brain rewire itself to improve behavior, improve conditions? So that's what we set out to do, is kind of bridge that gap. What if we could tackle mental health and these disorders from the traditional way with
Sure.
psychotherapy and so forth, but go a step further and really tackle it from a neuroscience and neurotechnologies perspective? And that's where there was a lot of room for improvement when we looked at that
Yeah.
landscape. And so we set
And
out.
you're talking about around the country, not just
around the
locally here in
country, not
Austin,
just
yeah.
and you can make the arguments around the world too.
Yeah.
And so we kind of looked at one thing at a time and figured out how we can improve upon it. How can we integrate it into one kind of holistic approach to mental health from the perspective of neuroscience, of sort of brain health together. And that's why we take that approach of covering all of our bases. We have EEG diagnostics to get a snapshot of the brain. We have psychological and neurological evaluations.
Psychotherapy,
Traditional psychotherapy. We have TMS for depression, OCD, and other disorders. We have neurofeedback for a whole host of disorders. And then we even have at-home sleep studies, and we assess people's sleep, and then we have diet and sleep consults to kind of help figure out, what's
you cover
going
all the
on.
bases,
As many as we can. There's probably some we're missing.
But very few.
Very few for now, and hopefully we tackle those as well
as you go. Yeah. So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the treatments, because this is where I really started to understand a little bit more about how, y'all's mission statement, if you will, which, as far as I can tell, is bridging neuroscience and real world mental health. And that's a fascinating, if you will, mission statement. But let's talk about some of the treatments like TMS. Can you explain what that is to people? Because I'm not familiar with the term.
Yeah, so TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. This was technology that was just beginning to make its way into FDA approval back when I was in grad school in the early 2000s, and the first of which was for depression.
Okay.
And so the way that TMS works is it creates a high amplitude current and a sort of what they call a figure-8 coil. This is how most TMS machines operate. There's a few that are a little different. The one that we use by a company called Apollo is set up this way. And so every current generates a magnetic field orthogonal to the direction of the current. And so you create this magnetic flux. When you have this figure-8 coil, it's set up in such a way that it localizes the point of stimulation so that it can stimulate neurons at a very specific place, not very deeply, but kind of on the cortical surface. And using that, you can either excite neurons that are kind of quiet or
dormant or something.
In the case of folks with depression.
Okay.
And we do that on the left side. And then you can also inhibit the firing, so reduce the activity. Maybe they're firing too often.
Okay.
It's almost like, think of it like additional noise in your brain. You're trying to quiet that, and so we can, by using a different
like people
protocol,
who are more hyperactive sort of thing.
Possibly? So a good example is for anxiety. So if someone has anxiety,
there you go.
We'd stimulate the right side, and we don't really stimulate in the same sense as we do for depression, but we try and use sort of a suppression protocol where we're trying to suppress that. We're trying to calm it down. And we're targeting a specific location because that's inherent to the technology, but we're not trying to actually change that particular brain region. We're trying to impact a network, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Because everything, anxiety is a network of brain regions. Depression impacts a network of brain regions. And so you effectively stimulate a node of that network.
Okay.
And the idea is that it has downstream effects.
And how do you know where it is?
That's a good question too.
How do you find it?
Yeah, and so there's very specific motor mapping protocols. There's ways that we actually customize a cap for every person based on their head shape. We kind of draw it out, we figure where these locations are. Actually, borrow the convention used from EEG that's been around forever to figure out the target locations, and then we stimulate more or less in the intended area. And then, as time goes on, we can move things around, we can tweak. And for TMS, it's important to establish that person's what's called the motor threshold. So we have folks, we stimulate the motor cortex on the opposite side of the hand that we want to look at because it's contralateral to wherever your movement is. And then we just keep on stimulating at different thresholds to figure out where's the bare minimum threshold to create movement in the hand and the finger. And then that becomes that person's.
So you can create movement yourself through your.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just by stimulating, by
Okay.
activating those neurons, because that's how it works.
That's
If
how
I
it
move my
works.
hand, the neurons fire. If
Got
the
it.
neurons fire, the hand moves.
Got
So
it.
we either move the hand, or we can, since we're not observing, in the case of TMS, we're stimulating. We can stimulate and see the effect of the hand movement.
Wow.
It's pretty cool the first few times. Kind of weird for some folks experience it for the first time, but
and
that's the protocol.
that kind of leads into a question about, at least as far as this goes around that, is what's some of the biggest myths people believe about mental health today? Like depression, as an example, or anything.
Right. So I think the idea that depression and mental health becomes oversimplified, such that I have depression, that's a mental thing.
I'll take medication for
medication, exactly.
Right.
And that's it. And it's really much more complicated than that. There's no mental health issue that's isolated. All of it, for sure, is a manifestation of some sort of issue occurring in the brain, whether it's a network that's not operating optimally, or someone has a lesion, as the case may be, or basically just how the brain has been wired from childhood into adulthood, or there's different chemical processes that are occurring or maybe not occurring as they should. But it's more than just that. It's more than just the neuroscience piece, what's going on in the brain. There's also so many factors that impact this. There's almost no mental health disorder that isn't impacted by things like sleep, based on what we know about the gut biome, by diet and nutrition, and then especially by experiences in the environment that folks are in.
And probably part of the culture too.
Culture,
just
as well.
living this weird culture we live in.
It's and
there's different than when I was growing up, for sure.
Microcultures, depending on where you are and the areas that you live in.
A lot of trauma.
And the important thing is not just avoiding the trauma, but how to cope with it. What's the best solution? Maybe taking a pill works for some people. Maybe it's psychotherapy. Maybe it's doing
combination
neurofeedback or TMS. Maybe it's assessing sleep and diet. There's usually not a single solution in many of these cases. Or if there is, it's a lot of trial and error to get there.
Yeah. And so that's kind of leads into not your necessarily your ideal patient, if you will, but all the different services and treatments you all provide can help a wide variety of people, from children with ADHD and even executives who may have a lot of stress, or, kind of talk about, to the open public, how they may benefit from your services.
That's a great
because
question.
It's almost
that's
everybody.
A question. It is. It really is. Folks say, who
I got really clear about that.
And we don't specialize in any one particular group. The way we've set our clinic up, the way we've designed things, is that we want to be able to help everyone that comes to that door. We want to help children as young as 4 or 5, maybe for evaluations, but also for therapy as well, if we can.
Sure.
Helping with children with oppositional defiant disorder, autism, ADHD, learning disorders, being able to not only figure out what's going on with them, but being able to improve their behavior so that they can have a better quality of life.
That's right.
Growing up. And as we said earlier, that has downstream effects. And then we also help adults with all sorts of disorders. We have protocols to reduce tremor using TMS for Parkinson's patients. We have there's even protocols to help with headaches and with migraines.
I love that.
With getting rid of tinnitus and
insomnia.
There's different protocols to help folks sleep better.
Yeah.
There's different types of insomnia. And then for those folks who don't have any diagnosable disorder, they just want to be better. They want to be better at their job. They want to improve their golf game. They want to be a better employee at their job. They want to increase their attention, their memory. There are protocols that we have based on all of the neuroscience research and literature we've looked at that can improve those things over time.
It's just fascinating.
And our goal is not to say no to anyone. Our goal is to help folks however we can. Some folks a lot more than others, but that's our goal. We want to have an answer for everyone that comes through our door.
It's like I live, and I've told other people this, it's not necessarily new, but I live with a certain level of anxiety and fear all the time. It's sort of on the surface. It doesn't paralyze me, but it's just there. And I don't know what it is, so maybe you can help me.
Yeah, we'd love to have you come in the clinic.
I don't know what it is.
We hear things like that from different folks, depending on their level of anxiety and things that are kind of bothering them. And again, a lot of times it's related to sleep. Sometimes sleep manifests as a result of that. Sometimes sleep is the cause. But we have protocols, and we've had great success from the clients that have gone through it in reducing that anxiety, kind of quieting the
Yeah,
mind,
quiet
like
it
we
down.
talked about before.
Yeah.
So you can focus on the things that matter, and it's
Yeah.
not a distraction. It's not noise. It's not debilitating for some folks.
That's right.
And some folks see improvements after as few as 5 sessions.
Well, as I suspected, the time went way too fast. We got about a minute and a half. So let's kind of end up with this question real quick. And looking ahead the next 10 to 20 years, what do you see how neuroscience can change some of the things we're talking about, anxiety, depression, addiction, et cetera, et cetera? Where do you see the future of your business?
Right. That's such an important question, because so much of the answer to that depends on a number of things. One is, what will the FDA be able to approve in the coming years and decades? There's a lot of clinical trials ongoing for different neurotechnologies to use not only in clinic but at home as well.
Yeah.
And so as we're pushing the envelope as a society, as a scientific community, on how we can measure the brain, but also how we can stimulate the brain, there's huge potential there. Again, not just to improve mental health in clinics like ours,
Right.
but also at home, or sometimes in conjunction with the two, to be able to do this as more of a regular part of everyday life for folks, not just for improving quality of life for folks with disorders, but everyone who wants that improvement and wants to put the time, energy into improving themselves and their brain.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to start to get much closer to that.
It's so exciting to see what you guys are going to be doing in the future, and again, you've got big plans. You're big thinkers. It's not just Austin, Texas. We're going to take this around the country. Amen?
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Well, I can see it.
Yeah.
I can see it. Well, listen, Doctor, I've really enjoyed our time together. And of course, I've learned a lot, and really appreciate you sharing your expertise and with all the people out there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.